Have you ever been asked to give up something that was rightfully yours? Your seat, your dignity, your place in the world, just because of how you look. Imagine settling into your seat on a plane, ticket in hand, only to be told you don't belong there. That's what happened to Ariana Fields, a black woman, a mother, and though no one on that flight knew it, the CEO of a major company. One request to move seemed small, but it carried the weight of centuries of bias. Now, here's the question: what would you do? Stay silent to avoid conflict or stand firm, knowing the world is watching? What if your calm refusal could change not just your day, but the rules for millions of travelers after you? If you were in Ariana's seat, could you hold your ground? Could you carry that quiet strength? This isn't just her story. It's a story about all of us, about dignity, justice, and what happens when ordinary moments reveal extraordinary truths. Stay with us, because what follows will leave you questioning and inspired. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this powerful story. The morning started quiet, almost too quiet for a Thursday in Dallas. The Fields household was usually alive with the sound of clattering spoons, the hum of the coffee maker, and Caleb's sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floors. But today felt different. Ariana Fields, 41 years old, stood at the kitchen counter pouring hot coffee into her travel mug. She wore her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her gray blazer already buttoned, her leather briefcase resting by the door. There was a calmness about her, the kind of quiet strength that comes from years of walking into boardrooms where no one expected her to belong and proving them wrong every single time. Across the table, her 13-year-old son Caleb toyed with a bowl of cereal he had barely touched. His eyes, sharp and thoughtful for his age, followed his mother's every move. "Mom," he said, breaking the silence, "do people ever treat you differently when you travel?" The spoon in Ariana's hand paused just short of her coffee cup. She glanced at her son, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask that?" Caleb shrugged, fiddling with the hem of his t-shirt. "I saw this video last night. A guy said he got kicked off a flight because they didn't believe he belonged in first class. He looked like us." Ariana's heart squeezed. She knew this conversation would come one day. She also knew Caleb had inherited her gift of observation, always seeing more than she wished he would. She set the spoon down, walked around the table, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Listen, Caleb, sometimes people make assumptions. They see our skin before they see our story. But you know what matters." Caleb looked up. "What that we know who we are. No one can take that from us. Not in a boardroom, not in an airport, not anywhere." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen again. Then Caleb cracked a small smile. "So, no one ever tried to make you move seats?" Ariana chuckled softly, though her chest ached. "Let's just say, if anyone ever did, they'd be in for a surprise." She kissed his forehead, grabbed her mug, and checked her watch. The car service would arrive in 15 minutes. Today's trip was important. She had a major presentation in New York for Atlas Capital Partners, a project she had spent 6 months perfecting. But more than that, today was another chance to show Caleb, by example, how dignity is carried in the small, everyday choices. While she double-checked her documents, Caleb slipped into the living room, where the television played the morning news. He lowered the volume, but not before hearing another story about corporate scandals and unequal treatment. He muttered under his breath, "People just don't change," from the doorway. Ariana caught his words. She didn't correct him. Instead, she whispered a quiet promise to herself, "I'll prove to you they can." The black SUV pulled up right on time. Ariana hugged her son tightly, savoring the moment as if she knew the day ahead would test every ounce of her resolve. Caleb held on longer than usual, Don't let them mess with you. Mom, he said, his voice half playful, half serious. I won't, she answered, steady and certain. I never do. As she slid into the back seat of the SUV, Dallas unfolded outside her window. The rising sun painted the skyline golden, yet Ariana felt a familiar weight pressing against her chest. Airports had never been neutral spaces for her. They were mirrors reflecting society's unspoken rules about who belonged where. But Ariana Fields had built her life on rewriting those rules. The drive to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was uneventful, the steady hum of tires against asphalt filling the silence. Ariana used the ride to review her slides one more time, fingers brushing the smooth edges of her presentation notes. Numbers, projections, impact reports. These were the things she could control. What she could never control was the way strangers sometimes looked at her, weighing her presence before she even spoke a word. When the SUV pulled up to Terminal D, the driver hopped out quickly to open her door. Ariana stepped into the cool morning air, adjusting the strap of her briefcase against her shoulder. The terminal was alive with movement, families pulling oversized suitcases, business travelers juggling phones and coffee cups, the sharp echo of announcements bouncing off the tall glass walls. She walked toward the Atlas Airlines counter, her heels clicking against the polished floor. A row of monitors displayed flight information. And there it was, Atlas Flight 729, Dallas to New York. On time. Ariana allowed herself a small smile. Smooth travel meant more time to prepare before the meeting. At the check-in line, she handed her ID and ticket to the young agent behind the desk. His name tag read Evan. He looked at the ID, then at her, then back at the ID again. The pause was subtle but unmistakable. Ariana noticed it was impossible not to. "Good morning, Miss Fields," he said finally. His tone professional but a little too careful, like someone stepping around a puddle they didn't want to touch. "Traveling first class today?" "Yes," Ariana answered with a calm smile. "Seat 2A, Evan typed quickly on his keyboard, then nodded. "Everything looks good. Here's your boarding pass. Boarding will begin in about 40 minutes. Ariana thanked him, took the pass, and walked away. The moment was small, barely a flicker of hesitation, but she had lived long enough to know those flickers meant something deeper. They were reminders that her presence in certain spaces still felt, to some, like an exception. She made her way toward security. The TSA line was long but efficient, passengers shedding belts and shoes into plastic bins. Ariana moved smoothly through the motions, practiced from years of business travel. As she gathered her belongings at the other end of the conveyor, she heard a voice behind her. "Can you believe this line?" a man complained loudly. "First class, and they still make us go through this circus." Ariana glanced over her shoulder. A tall man in a navy suit, salt and pepper hair slicked back, waved his platinum card impatiently at the officer. His wife stood beside him, pearls glinting against her tailored dress. Their luggage was branded, the kind that seemed designed less for travel and more for display. The man noticed Ariana looking and offered a tight smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. She returned a polite nod and walked on. In the lounge, she found a quiet corner with a view of the runway. Planes taxied slowly, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Ariana sipped sparkling water, opened her laptop, and tried to focus on her slides. But her mind kept circling back to Caleb's question that morning. Do people ever treat you differently when you travel? She thought of the countless little moments clerks double-checking her boarding pass, flight attendants skipping her row when offering pre-departure drinks, the subtle shift in tone when someone realized she was in first class by choice, not by mistake. None of it was new, but today, For reasons she couldn't quite explain, she felt a heavier weight pressing on her chest. The lounge announcement crackled overhead. Atlas Flight 729 to New York is now boarding all first-class passengers. Ariana packed up quickly, straightened her blazer, and walked to the gate. At gate D17, the boarding area was buzzing with energy. Families corralled children, business travelers paced while talking into headsets, and a group of college students laughed too loudly in the corner. At the front, the gate agent stood with a practiced smile. Ariana recognized the name on her badge, Samantha Cole. First class, now boarding. Samantha called, her voice cheerful but brisk. Ariana stepped forward, handed over her pass. Samantha scanned it, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. She looked at Ariana, then back at the screen, then back again. "Everything all right?" Ariana asked, keeping her tone even. "Yes, of course," Samantha said quickly, returning the pass. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Fields." Ariana walked down the jet bridge, the air growing warmer as she approached the aircraft. Inside the cabin, the first-class seats gleamed with leather polish and chrome fixtures. She placed her briefcase in the overhead bin and settled into seat 2A, the window seat at the front of the cabin. As she adjusted her seatbelt, she noticed the man from security, the tall one, with the platinum card, enter with his wife. They were the Whitfords. Ariana overheard the gate agent greeting them warmly, calling them by name, almost deferential. Charles and Margaret Whitford moved through the aisle as if the plane itself belonged to them. Margaret's gaze swept across the cabin and landed on Ariana. There was no mistaking the flicker of surprise in her expression, followed by something colder. She leaned toward her husband and whispered, too low for Ariana to catch the words, but not low enough to miss the intent. Charles glanced at Ariana briefly, then looked away with a smirk. Ariana exhaled slowly, turning her face toward the window. The runway stretched endlessly into the horizon, silver wings of other planes flashing in the sunlight. She reminded herself of her own advice to Caleb. No one can take away who you are. The rest of the first-class cabin filled quickly. Businessmen with newspapers, a woman tapping on a tablet, a young couple laughing quietly. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle, offering greetings, adjusting luggage, making sure everything appeared perfect. But Ariana could feel something beneath the polished surface, a current of tension she couldn't quite place. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, steadying her breath. She had been in enough rooms of power to recognize when her presence disrupted an unspoken order. And though she couldn't yet see how, she sensed this flight was about to test her in ways no boardroom ever had. The cabin of Atlas Flight 729 carried the low murmur of settling passengers, the rustle of jackets being folded into overhead bins, and the soft clink of glasses from the galley where attendants prepared pre-flight drinks. Ariana adjusted her seatbelt, slid her phone into the side pocket, and glanced at the seat across the aisle. It remained empty for the moment, though she knew it would not stay that way for long. Samantha Cole moved through the first-class section, greeting passengers with rehearsed warmth. She paused slightly when she passed Ariana, her smile polite but stiff. Ariana noted it, then looked back toward the aisle. She had grown used to these subtle pauses, but today she logged every detail with careful precision. Moments later, the Whitfords entered. Charles carried himself with a self-assured swagger, the kind of entitlement that seemed built into his posture. Margaret followed closely, clutching a leather handbag in one hand and her boarding pass in the other. The couple approached row 2. Ariana already felt the shift in air. "That's supposed to be my seat," Charles said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. His finger pointed toward Ariana's 2A. There must be some mistake. Ariana turned slowly, her voice steady. This is seat 2A. It's on my ticket. Perhaps you're in 2B. Margaret's face tightened, as if she had tasted something bitter. Are you sure? She asked, her tone dripping with disbelief. Because we always book this row. Samantha appeared quickly, a touch of nervousness in her eyes. She looked from Ariana to the Whitfords, then back to Ariana. Mrs. Fields, would you mind stepping aside while I check this? Ariana remained seated, her voice calm but firm. There's no need. My boarding pass clearly states 2A. Charles crossed his arms. We're frequent flyers with Atlas. We've logged over 2 million miles. This is our row. Why don't you just take another seat? Save us all the trouble. Other passengers had begun to listen, eyes flicking between Ariana and the couple. Some looked uncomfortable, others amused, as if watching a minor drama unfold before takeoff. Ariana drew a breath, remembering Caleb's question that morning. She thought of how easily she could comply, slide into another row, and let the moment dissolve. But she also knew what that would teach her son. Dignity, once surrendered, was never easily reclaimed. I'm comfortable here, she said evenly. I paid for this seat. I'll remain where I am. Margaret whispered something sharp to her husband. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as though the matter were trivial yet irritating. Samantha, still hovering, cleared her throat. Mrs. Fields, if you could move to 7C, I'll issue you a voucher for the inconvenience. We'll make sure you're compensated. The words were delivered with the cadence of customer service, but Ariana heard the undercurrent. Make room for the ones we value. Step aside quietly. She looked Samantha directly in the eyes. I'm not moving. My seat is 2A. The surrounding murmur grew louder. A young man in row 3 raised his phone slightly. Camera poised, but not yet recording. Ariana noticed and held her composure, knowing any moment might now become public. Charles leaned closer, his voice lower but edged with condescension. Lady, you don't want to cause a scene. Be reasonable. Some seats just aren't meant for everyone. Ariana felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady. I assure you, Mr. Whitford, this seat is meant for whoever holds the ticket. Today, that's me. The standoff stretched, tension thickening the air. Samantha shifted uncomfortably, then excused herself with a promise to check with the supervisor. She disappeared up the aisle, leaving Ariana and the Whitfords locked in silence, broken only by the hum of boarding announcements. Other passengers filed past, some stealing glances, others deliberately avoiding eye contact. Ariana fixed her gaze out the window, the tarmac bathed in sunlight, and inhaled deeply. Inside, however, her thoughts wrestled. Why does this still happen? Why must every moment of rest be defended? She pressed her hands lightly against her knees, grounding herself in the truth she carried. She belonged here. When Samantha returned, Brian Harlow followed behind her. His uniform marked him as the gate supervisor, his expression already stern, as if prepared to enforce order with authority rather than listen. He addressed Charles first, his tone deferential. Mr. Whitford. Mrs. Whitford. What seems to be the issue? Margaret wasted no time. This woman is in our seat. We always sit here. She refuses to move. Brian turned his eyes toward Ariana, cool and measured. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. Without a word, Ariana handed it over. He scanned it quickly, then frowned. C2A. Yes, that's correct. He hesitated, then added, however, as a courtesy to our loyal flyers, I'd like to ask you to consider moving to 7C. We'll compensate you generously. The repetition struck Ariana like a familiar refrain. She heard not an offer, but a demand wrapped in polite phrases. Her jaw tightened, but her tone never wavered. "I purchased this seat. I'm keeping it." The silence afterward carried weight. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispers rippling through the cabin. The young man in row 3 raised his phone higher, his camera light blinking red. The story was no longer contained within row 2. Brian sighed, his patience thinning. "If you choose not to comply, ma'am, I may have to involve security. I'd prefer not to escalate." Ariana met his gaze. "Then don't escalate. Simply honor the ticket you issued me." Her words hung in the air, calm yet unyielding. The tension was palpable, every breath in the cabin drawn shallow. Margaret clutched her pearls as though insulted. Charles leaned back, smirking, waiting for Ariana to fold. But she did not. And in that moment, Ariana Fields understood this was not merely about a seat on a plane. It was about a truth larger than the cabin, larger than the flight itself. It was about what Caleb would see when he looked at her, not just today, but in every lesson she would ever give him about dignity. The aisle lights dimmed as boarding wrapped up, but the heat of tension in row 2 had not cooled. Ariana sat upright, her back firm against the leather seat, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Her stillness was its own declaration. Across from her, Charles Whitford tapped his fingers impatiently on the armrest while Margaret whispered sharp complaints into his ear. Passengers nearby adjusted their posture, eager to appear uninvolved but unable to resist glances toward the confrontation that had already stalled the rhythm of boarding. Samantha returned with 2 glasses of sparkling water, her smile strained. She leaned closer to Ariana, her voice lowered but clipped. "Mrs. Fields, if you'll agree to move, we can upgrade you on your return flight. It really would make everything smoother." Ariana turned her eyes from the window to meet Samantha's gaze. "I'm not interested in smoother. I'm interested in fair. This is my seat. That's the end of it." Samantha's cheeks flushed. She set one of the glasses down on Margaret's tray table with exaggerated care, then retreated a few steps, signaling toward the galley. Brian Harlow appeared again, his expression hardening into something that signaled authority about to be tested. He crouched slightly beside Ariana's seat, lowering his voice so only a few nearby could hear. "Ma'am, I'm asking you once more. The Whitfords are Platinum Elite members. They're part of our core loyalty base. If you cooperate, we'll ensure you're compensated and taken care of. If you refuse, I'll have to call in security. You don't want this to turn ugly." Ariana inhaled slowly. She could feel every pair of eyes in first class measuring her response. Somewhere behind her, a phone camera continued recording, its tiny light blinking. She thought of Caleb, imagined his face watching later if this video ever surfaced. She steadied her breath and answered. "What turns this ugly," she said softly, "is asking me to surrender what I've paid for because you value their loyalty over my dignity." Brian's jaw tightened. He straightened, addressing the couple with exaggerated courtesy. "Mr. Whitford, Mrs. Whitford, please bear with us. We'll have this resolved in just a moment." Charles leaned back, lips curling into a half-smile. "It's about time. Some people don't understand how the system works." Margaret clucked her tongue, folding her hands neatly on her lap. "It's exhausting when people make everything a problem." Ariana closed her eyes briefly, allowing their words to wash over her without taking root. She had trained herself to do this, to resist the temptation to respond to every jab. Still, her chest burned. Brian moved toward the front of the cabin, murmuring into his radio. Moments later, 2 uniformed security officers entered the jet bridge and stepped into the aisle. The quiet hum of passengers shifted into a low current of whispers. One officer, a tall man with sandy hair, approached Ariana's row. "Ma'am, We've been asked to escort you off the plane. Please gather your belongings." The words landed heavy. Ariana looked up at him, steady and unflinching. "And why is that? What violation have I committed?" The officer hesitated, glancing toward Brian for instruction. Brian responded crisply, "Failure to comply with crew requests." Ariana let the silence stretch for a moment, then spoke clearly enough for everyone in earshot. "The only request I've refused is to give up the seat I paid for to accommodate another passenger." "That's not a violation. That's discrimination." The air thickened. A woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. A businessman 2 rows back lowered his newspaper to watch more closely. The young man with the phone tilted it higher, his camera capturing not just Ariana's face, but the faces of the officers, Brian and the Whitfords. The taller officer's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, I understand, but we've been instructed to remove you." Ariana kept her voice calm, almost measured. "Then you'll remove me knowing you're enforcing something unjust, and you'll do it on camera." The younger officer shifted on his feet, clearly uneasy. He looked toward Brian, who gave a curt nod, slowly, reluctantly. The officers reached for Ariana's briefcase in the overhead bin. "Don't touch my things," she said firmly. "I'll walk." She rose with deliberate grace, straightened her blazer, and collected her bag herself. She stepped into the aisle, her head held high, her eyes forward. Around her, whispers swelled, and the recording phone followed her movement. Charles muttered something smug under his breath, but Ariana did not look his way. As she moved down the aisle, the officer trailing behind, she felt the sting of humiliation settle into her skin like frost. Each step carried the weight of every time she had been told she didn't belong, every time she had been asked to prove she was enough. Yet beneath the humiliation burned something fiercer resolve. She reached the jet bridge, the cool air rushing against her face. Behind her, the cabin buzzed with speculation, but Ariana no longer heard it. Her mind had already leapt forward, beyond the embarrassment, beyond the moment, into the space where decisions are made that change more than flights. They change narratives. As she entered the terminal, Brian's voice called after her, low but sharp. "You should have just moved. It would have been easier for everyone." Ariana turned just enough for him to see her profile, her words quiet but resolute. Easier isn't the same as right. She walked on, past the curious stares of other passengers waiting at the gate, past the monitors flickering with departure times, her briefcase heavy at her side. She didn't know exactly how, but she knew this story wouldn't end here. The terminal air was cool, but carried a sting sharper than the recycled air of the cabin. Ariana walked slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking against the linoleum. Her briefcase swung lightly at her side, though it felt far heavier than its contents. Passengers waiting at nearby gates turned their heads, curious about the woman being escorted by 2 uniformed officers. Some whispered, others lifted their phones, unsure whether they should record. Ariana kept her gaze forward. She would not allow herself to shrink. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we need to step to the side." He motioned toward an alcove beside the gate counter. Brian Harlow stood there already, arms folded, radiating the authority of someone who believed his decisions were beyond reproach. Samantha hovered near the counter, avoiding Ariana's eyes, fiddling nervously with a stack of boarding passes. Brian spoke first. "Mrs. Fields, let's be clear. This situation escalated because you refused a simple request. Now, we're prepared to rebook you on a later flight in business class. Consider it a courtesy." Ariana placed her briefcase gently on the counter and faced him directly. Her voice was calm, but it carried an unmistakable steel. I did not refuse a simple request. I refused to surrender my paid seat to accommodate your preferred passengers. There is a difference. Brian's lips thinned. You're making this more complicated than it has to be. Complication, Ariana said, is what happens when fairness is treated as optional. Nearby, the young man who had filmed on board had followed into the terminal. He adjusted his cap, checked his phone, and quietly began streaming again. The screen glowed in his hand, capturing Ariana, the officers, and Brian's tense posture. Margaret and Charles Whitford appeared behind Brian, their luggage already wheeled off the jet bridge. Margaret exhaled dramatically, as though the mere presence of Ariana delayed their world. Is she still causing trouble? Charles chuckled. Unbelievable. He looked Ariana up and down, his voice dripping with mock courtesy. Some people just don't know when they're out of their league. Ariana's stomach twisted, but she held herself steady. She thought of Caleb, of the countless times she had told him, "Stand tall, even when they try to cut you down." She would not falter now. The taller officer shifted uneasily, his hand brushing the radio at his belt. "Ma'am, are you going to accept the rebooking?" Ariana took a slow breath, then answered clearly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "No. What I will accept is accountability." Her words hung in the air, a challenge no one at the counter seemed prepared to answer. Brian's face reddened, and Samantha bit her lip, staring down at her papers. The Whitfords exchanged smug glances. Charles leaned closer to Brian. "You're wasting time. Get her out of here. People like us don't wait." It was the phrase "people like us" that ignited the spark in Ariana's chest. She had endured the humiliation of being escorted off, the sting of whispers, the smirk of entitlement. But those 3 words pushed the moment into something larger than inconvenience. She turned slightly, addressing not just Brian and the officers, but the crowd of onlookers. "This isn't about a seat anymore. This is about what it means when someone like me is told to move again and again so that someone like them is comfortable." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The young man with the camera leaned forward, capturing every word. Margaret scoffed loudly, but Charles's smirk faltered under the weight of so many eyes. Brian snapped. "That's enough. You're disrupting operations. Officers, escort her out of the secure area." The shorter officer hesitated. "Sir, she's calm. She's not disrupting. I gave you an order." Brian barked. Ariana's pulse thudded in her ears, but she steadied herself. She bent to retrieve her briefcase, her fingers brushing the cool leather handle. As she stood, she met the young man's camera lens. For a fraction of a second, she allowed her mask to slip, letting the hurt and resolve shine through. The taller officer gestured gently. "This way, ma'am." Ariana walked with them through the terminal where conversations had hushed and phones angled discreetly to record. She felt exposed, every step a scar etched in memory. But she also felt something else, a gathering current, like wind before a storm. They led her toward the exit of the secure zone, past travelers who stepped aside with wide eyes. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why are they taking her?" The mother shook her head, lips pressed tight, unwilling or unable to answer. At the checkpoint, the taller officer paused. His voice softened. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't make the rules." Ariana looked at him, her expression unreadable. That's the problem. Too many people follow rules without asking if they're just... The officer's eyes flickered with something like shame. He lowered his gaze. Outside security. Ariana stopped. She could feel her phone vibrating inside her blazer pocket. She knew who it was before she even looked. With a calmness that belied the storm inside her, she answered, "Yes." Her voice was even, controlled. On the other end, her chief of staff's voice came steady. Precise. We saw the stream. Do you want me to activate? Ariana glanced back through the glass wall at the gate, where the Whitfords now sat comfortably, sipping water, their laughter carrying faintly through. She thought of Brian's smirk, Samantha's silence, the officer's reluctant compliance, the way the crowd had shifted uneasily but said nothing. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed focus. Activate. Her chief of staff didn't hesitate. Understood. As Ariana ended the call, the weight of humiliation transformed into something sharper, steadier purpose. She adjusted the strap of her briefcase, squared her shoulders, and began walking toward the exit. Her steps no longer heavy, but measured with intent. She knew the story was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had ever been forced to surrender what was rightfully theirs. The humiliation had been public, but so would the reckoning. The Texas evening was warm, the kind that wrapped itself around you like a heavy quilt. But Ariana didn't feel it. She stood outside the terminal, her phone still warm from the call she had just made. Her heart was steady, her face calm. But inside, the weight of what had happened pressed against her ribs. People were still posting the video. She could sense it spreading like wildfire, every share adding fuel to a fire she hadn't asked for, but now couldn't ignore. She crossed the street to the quieter side of the airport, away from the main flow of passengers. Her chief of staff, Danielle Rivers, was already waiting by a black SUV. Danielle wore her sharp suit like armor, her expression firm, but her eyes softened when she saw Ariana. "I'm so sorry," Danielle said, gripping Ariana's arm briefly. "We saw everything. It's already trending." Ariana slid into the back seat, Danielle following. The driver closed the door, leaving the two women in a cocoon of silence before Ariana finally spoke. "What's the damage?" Danielle pulled out her tablet. "The stream from that kid has over 200,000 views in less than an hour. Hashtags are spreading 'Give up your seat' or 'Flying while black,' and," she hesitated, "Atlas Airlines hasn't made a statement yet." Ariana closed her eyes, a muscle in her jaw tightening. "Of course they haven't. They're waiting to see if it dies down." Danielle nodded, "But it won't. Not this time. People are angry, and they should be." The SUV rolled forward, the airport fading into the background. Ariana stared out the tinted window, her reflection faint against the glass. She thought of Caleb. He had texted twice, "Are you okay? Mom," and then, "I'm proud of you." She hadn't responded yet. She wanted to, but she also wanted to be sure that when she did, it wasn't from a place of pain, but strength. Danielle tapped the tablet. "So, do we make this about personal injustice or systemic accountability?" Ariana turned to face her, her eyes sharp. "Both. If we keep it personal, they'll dismiss it as one woman's experience. If we go systemic, they'll say it's abstract. We make it both. Danielle, we show them what happened to me, and we prove it's not an isolated case." Danielle leaned back, studying her friend. "You're ready to go public. I've never been more ready." Ariana's voice didn't waver. Back at her penthouse later that night, the city of Dallas glittered beneath her balcony. Ariana stood barefoot on the cool tile, the hum of the city drifting upward. She thought about her father, who had told her once, "You don't fight every battle, Ariana, but the ones you do fight, you finish. Inside." Danielle was on the phone with reporters, her voice crisp and professional. The television flickered with breaking news banners. Ariana turned back inside, walked to her desk, and opened her laptop. She began to type. The statement wasn't flowery, wasn't angry. It was precise. She described what had happened, the request to surrender her seat, the public escort, the words, "people like us." She laid it out plainly, each sentence sharp as glass. She ended with one line: "I did not yield my seat, because my dignity is not negotiable." By dawn, the statement was everywhere. Major outlets carried it. Talk shows debated it. Social media roared. Ariana's inbox flooded with messages from strangers thanking her, from colleagues offering support, from others sharing their own stories of being asked to move, to yield, to be smaller so someone else could feel larger. But not everyone was supportive. Atlas Airlines' silence hardened into defensive whispers leaked to the press. Unnamed sources claimed Ariana had been combative, that she had escalated the situation. Danielle slammed her hand on the table when she read it. They're trying to spin it. Typical. Ariana only smiled faintly. Let them.
We'll answer with facts. The facts came quickly. A former flight attendant messaged Ariana with stories of bias in the company's training. A ground crew worker sent an anonymous tip about managers overlooking repeated complaints. A travel blogger shared a cache of emails suggesting Atlas executives had long known about customer service disparities but buried the reports. Each piece added weight to Ariana's story, shifting it from incident to indictment. The next week, Ariana stood at a podium at a Dallas community center, the room filled with cameras, reporters, and everyday travelers who had come to support her. She wore no jewelry, no bright colors, just a dark suit that let her words stand alone. "I was asked to surrender my seat because of who I am," she said, her voice carrying through the packed room. "But this isn't just about me. This is about a system that too often tells people of color, women, anyone who doesn't fit the image, that their place is negotiable, that their dignity is conditional. That ends now." The applause was thunderous. A reporter shouted, "What do you want from Atlas Airlines?" Ariana looked directly at the camera. Accountability, change, and a guarantee that no one else will ever be told to move because of prejudice. Afterward, Danielle found her backstage, tears in her eyes though her smile was wide. "You lit a fire, Ariana. I've never seen anything like it." Ariana exhaled, the weight of the moment settling into her bones. "Then let's make sure it doesn't burn out." As the days passed, the fire only grew. Protests formed at airports. Celebrities tweeted their support. Lawmakers called for hearings. Ariana became the reluctant but undeniable face of a movement. At home, Caleb hugged her tightly one night and whispered, "Mom, you're changing things." She kissed his forehead. "We're changing things," she corrected, "because you give me the courage to keep going." But beneath the surge of support, Ariana felt the pushback strengthening, too. Atlas Airlines had convened an emergency board meeting. Rumors swirled of executives plotting to protect themselves, to sacrifice a few employees, but keep the culture untouched. Danielle handed Ariana a sealed envelope one evening. "Anonymous delivery," she said. Inside was a stack of internal memos, stamped "Confidential." Ariana read them slowly, her pulse quickening with each page. They detailed a strategy to discredit her, paint her as unstable, buy off the media. At the bottom, Lawrence Pratt's signature was clear. Ariana set the papers down. "They want to fight," she murmured. Danielle met her gaze. "Then they've picked the wrong woman." The leaked memos lay on Ariana's dining table like a trail of footprints leading straight to Atlas Airlines' top floor. She read them twice, then a third time, each word sinking deeper into her resolve. Danielle paced the room, her heels tapping against the hardwood floor, her voice sharp with controlled fury. "This is a smear campaign," Danielle said, waving a hand over the papers. "They're going to paint you as erratic, emotional, even unhinged. It's textbook." Ariana leaned back in her chair, clasping her hands together. "It's also desperate. They wouldn't go this far unless they were afraid. They should be afraid." Danielle snapped. "Because we have truth,
video, witnesses, and now evidence of their cover-up. But Ariana, once we release this, there's no walking it back. This becomes a war. Ariana's gaze softened, but her voice carried no hesitation. Then, it's a war worth fighting. The next morning, Ariana sat down with a national morning show host. The studio lights gleamed overhead, the host's tone hushed but firm. "Mrs. Fields, Atlas Airlines claims you escalated the situation. How do you respond?" Ariana looked directly into the camera, her expression calm, her words measured. "When a black woman refuses to surrender her seat to accommodate someone else's entitlement, it's often called escalation, but I call it dignity. And dignity isn't negotiable." The host pressed. "Atlas executives say they're investigating." Ariana allowed the faintest smile. "We've seen their idea of investigations. I have documents that show their intent to silence complaints, bury evidence, and target me personally. I won't be silenced, and I won't be alone. Too many voices have been ignored for too long." By the time she left the studio, hashtags had doubled in reach. Clips of her interview spread across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, young creators pairing her words with footage from the original live stream. One soundbite, "Dignity isn't negotiable," became a rallying cry. Atlas Airlines struck back by releasing a carefully worded statement that afternoon. "We regret any misunderstanding," it read, "but we stand by our employees who acted according to protocol." They referred to Ariana only as the passenger, never by name, as if erasing her identity would make her less powerful. Danielle scoffed when she saw it. Protocol is their shield. Ariana. They think hiding behind the word will absolve them. Then we show the world what that protocol really means. Ariana replied. She arranged for a press conference in Washington, D.C., gathering not just reporters, but lawmakers and community leaders. Standing at the podium, Ariana held up the leaked memos. These documents prove Atlas Airlines doesn't just tolerate bias, it protects it. They don't want accountability. They want silence. The room erupted with questions, flashbulbs flickering like lightning. A senator stepped forward afterward, gripping Ariana's hand. "We'll call for hearings. This is bigger than one airline. The escalation wasn't only in boardrooms and newsrooms. At airports across the country, protesters gathered holding signs. We won't give up our seats. Justice takes flight. Atlas must fall." Flight crews whispered uneasily as passengers filmed every interaction, ready to hold them accountable. Inside Atlas headquarters, CEO Lawrence Pratt slammed his fist on the mahogany table. "She's dismantling us in public. We need to contain this before it destroys the brand." His advisors murmured strategies offer Ariana a settlement, discredit her family, release selective footage. But Pratt wasn't listening to caution. His pride was bruised, and Ariana's unyielding calm infuriated him. "She wants a fight. Then let's bury her under our weight." News of Pratt's hostility reached Ariana through another anonymous insider this time, a flight operations manager who had grown weary of the hypocrisy. The manager's email read, "They will attack you personally. Stay steady. The employees are watching, and many of us are with you." Ariana read it twice, her chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. She thought of the silent employees like Samantha Cole, who had stood by at the gate, torn between complicity and conscience. She wondered how many others lived with that silence every day. One evening, as she prepared for another appearance, Caleb approached her in the living room. He held his school tablet, showing her a news clip of students protesting outside an airport. "Mom, kids are talking about you at school. Some of them say you're a hero." Ariana sat down, pulling him close. "I don't want to be a hero. Caleb, I just want us to live in a world where you never have to prove you belong in your seat." His eyes glistened, then maybe being a hero is the only way to make that happen. Her heart ached with pride and fear. Caleb was right. This fight was no longer optional. It was generational. The pressure mounted daily. Media vans parked outside her building. Letters poured in, some offering support, others filled with venom. Ariana read them selectively, guarding her spirit, yet every hateful line only reinforced her mission to prove that silence was no longer acceptable. Danielle organized a coalition of civil rights leaders, former airline employees, labor unions, and even sympathetic pilots. Together, they drafted a proposal called the Equity in Air Travel Act, pushing for federal oversight of airline practices. Ariana became its unofficial spokesperson, standing before microphones in the nation's capital, her voice steady as stone. Airlines are entrusted with our safety, our mobility, our dignity, she declared. When they fail one, they fail all. We are here to ensure dignity is not optional, it is required. The applause echoed in chambers long resistant to change. Reporters swarmed, headlines multiplied, and still, Atlas clung stubbornly to denial. In Dallas, Lawrence Pratt huddled with his board. Shareholders were restless, stock prices tumbling. Fire a few supervisors, one board member suggested. Make it look decisive. But Pratt shook his head. If we give in now, she wins. And if she wins, every complaint, every accusation against us becomes fuel. We hold the line. Unbeknownst to him, Ariana's team was already preparing the next strike. Danielle had secured testimony from current employees willing to speak publicly. Despite the risk, their stories painted a damning picture: preferential treatment for wealthy white passengers, complaints ignored when filed by minorities, promotions withheld without explanation. When the testimonies went live, the narrative shifted irreversibly. Atlas Airlines was no longer defending a protocol, it was exposed as defending prejudice. Ariana sat in her office late that night, scrolling through the testimonies, her chest heavy with the weight of so many voices finally breaking free. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We're not alone anymore." Danielle, seated across from her, nodded firmly. And that's exactly why they can't stop us now. The weeks of mounting tension finally converged on a single morning. Ariana woke before dawn, the city of Washington still cloaked in gray. She stood at her window, clutching a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, and watched headlights streak down the streets below. Today was the hearing. Today, Atlas Airlines would face public questioning, and she would stand across from Lawrence Pratt for the first time since the incident. Danielle arrived early, her arms filled with folders and her tone clipped with efficiency. "The committee wants you seated front row. You'll testify after Pratt. He'll go first, which means he'll try to control the narrative. Don't let him bait you." Ariana set her mug down. "I won't. He'll come with arrogance. I'll come with truth." Caleb peeked into the kitchen, his backpack slung over his shoulder. "Good luck, Mom." His voice was steady, but Ariana saw the tightness in his jaw. She hugged him close, whispering in his ear, "This is for you and every kid who deserves better." By mid-morning, the congressional chamber buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the walls, cameras trained on the long wooden table where Pratt sat, flanked by attorneys. He looked composed, silver hair neatly combed, his tailored suit impeccable. Yet Ariana saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the flicker of annoyance as flashbulbs popped. The chairperson called the session to order. Pratt adjusted his microphone, his voice smooth. "Atlas Airlines is committed to fairness and safety. While we regret the unfortunate incident involving a passenger, we must emphasize our employees acted within established guidelines. We take all complaints seriously and continue to review our procedures." Danielle leaned toward Ariana, whispering, He's hiding behind platitudes. Ariana listened, her face impassive, though her hands tightened in her lap. Pratt's words were polished, but hollow. He offered sympathy without accountability, policy without humanity. When it was Ariana's turn, the room hushed. She rose, her dark suit simple, her posture straight. As she adjusted the microphone, her eyes swept across the chamber lawmakers, press, citizens, even Atlas employees who had come quietly to watch. "My name is Ariana Fields," she began. "I was the passenger Mr. Pratt refers to as an unfortunate incident. I was asked to surrender my seat not because of safety, not because of error, but because of prejudice. And when I refused, I was escorted off a plane as if I were a threat." She paused, letting her words settle. "I am not here for sympathy. I am here for accountability. For too long, corporations like Atlas have treated dignity as optional. I am here to say it is not optional, it is essential." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the chamber.
Reporters scribbled furiously, Ariana continued, her voice steady. "I have documents that show Atlas executives, including Mr. Pratt, not only ignored patterns of discrimination, but attempted to silence those who spoke up. This is not an isolated incident. It is a culture." Pratt shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. A senator leaned forward. "Mrs. Fields, are you saying Atlas Airlines knowingly perpetuated systemic bias?" "I am not saying it," Ariana replied. "The evidence is." She lifted a folder Danielle had placed in front of her. Emails, memos, testimonies, all pointing to the same conclusion. Silence was rewarded. Truth was punished. The chamber erupted. Pratt's attorney objected, but the chairperson banged the gavel. "Order! Mrs. Fields, please submit the documents for the record." Ariana handed them over, her hands steady. Pratt glared, his composure cracking, a vein pulsing at his temple. After the hearing adjourned, the hallway outside transformed into a storm of cameras and microphones. Ariana stood at the center, answering questions with calm clarity. Pratt attempted to slip past, but reporters swarmed him with shouts. "Did you know about the memos? Will you resign? Did you target Mrs. Fields?" His silence spoke louder than any denial. That evening, Ariana returned home, drained but resolute. Danielle dropped onto the couch, exhausted. "You broke him today. He tried to paint you as noise, and you turned him into the face of corruption." Ariana sank into a chair, pulling off her heels. "This isn't about breaking him, Danielle. It's about building something better." But the breaking point was yet to come. 2 days later, an internal Atlas server was hacked. Thousands of documents spilled into public view, training manuals, complaint logs, disciplinary records. Among them, a damning memo from Pratt himself. "Protect VIP clients at all costs. De-escalate by relocating other passengers. Appearance matters. Avoid escalation with high-value individuals, even if it means bending rules." The memo hit the news within hours. It wasn't just Ariana's story anymore. It was proof of deliberate policy. Protests surged at airports nationwide. Pilots issued a rare statement condemning leadership. Flight attendants whispered about strikes. Shareholders began to flee. Atlas stock plunged by 30% in a single day. Pratt tried to fight back with a press conference. He stood at a podium, sweating under the lights, insisting the memo is being taken out of context, but reporters weren't buying it. Questions flew like arrows, each one piercing the corporate armor he had wrapped around himself for decades. Meanwhile, Ariana addressed a rally outside DFW Airport. Thousands gathered, their voices rising as one. Signs read, "Dignity takes flight and we belong in every seat." Every. Ariana spoke into the microphone, her words carried on the wind. "This is not just about an airline. This is about every place where someone is told to move, to shrink, to be silent. We are done shrinking. We are done moving. And we are far from silent." The crowd roared, chants echoing across the tarmac. For a moment, Ariana closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. It was bigger than her now. It was unstoppable. That night, Caleb sat beside her on the balcony, the city glowing in the distance. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think they'll fire him?" Ariana exhaled slowly. "They might. But even if they don't, we've already won. Because we've shown the truth." Caleb leaned against her shoulder, and she wrapped an arm around him. In the quiet, she felt both the weight of the battle and the strength of what they had built. The breaking point wasn't just for Atlas. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The memo had shattered Atlas Airlines' last defense. Overnight, headlines screamed across every major outlet. Atlas prioritizes VIPs over ordinary passengers. Internal documents expose culture of bias. CEO under fire. Ariana woke to a phone vibrating endlessly on her nightstand. Messages streaming in from allies, reporters, even strangers. Caleb padded into her room, holding his own phone. "Mom, you're on the front page of everything." By mid-morning, Atlas headquarters in Dallas resembled a fortress under siege. Employees entered through side doors to avoid cameras. Protesters crowded the sidewalks, chanting Ariana's name alongside demands for Pratt's resignation. Shareholders held emergency calls, furious at the free-falling stock price. Inside, Pratt sat in the boardroom, his once steady confidence cracked into fragments. Sweat beaded along his hairline as directors bombarded him with accusations. "You lied to us, Lawrence," one barked, slamming a binder shut. "You've turned the company into a liability," another hissed. "We've lost billions in market value." Pratt tried to steady his voice. "This is temporary. If we stay the course, a woman interrupted, her eyes sharp. "Your course is driving us into the ground. The public doesn't trust us. Our employees are revolting. And Ariana Fields has the nation behind her. You're finished." Pratt's knuckles whitened around his glass of water. He wanted to shout, to reclaim control, but the authority he once wielded had evaporated. The board adjourned without him, leaving him alone in a cavernous room, surrounded by silence and the weight of his collapse. Meanwhile, Ariana was in New York, preparing for a televised town hall. Danielle laid out briefing notes, but Ariana set them aside. This isn't about talking points. This is about telling the truth, again and again, until no one can look away. The studio lights flared as Ariana stepped onto the stage. The moderator greeted her, then turned to the packed audience. Tonight, we hear directly from the woman at the center of a national reckoning. Ariana's story was already known, but hearing her speak live carried a different force. She described the humiliation of being escorted off, the sting of people like us, the courage it took to refuse. Then she widened the lens, connecting her experience to systemic injustice across industries. "This is not about one airline, one seat, or one CEO," she told the audience. "This is about whether we accept a world where dignity can be denied at the whim of prejudice. I will not accept it, and neither should you." The crowd erupted into applause, many on their feet. Social media exploded with clips, Ariana's words once again crystallizing the heart of the movement. Back in Dallas, Atlas executives scrambled. Employees staged walkouts at major hubs, Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles. Pilots leaked letters condemning leadership. The union hinted at a strike if Pratt remained. For the first time in company history, flights were delayed not by weather, not by mechanical issues, but by conscience. Danielle leaned across Ariana's desk late one night, her voice hushed but urgent. "They're cornered. Shareholders are pushing for a leadership purge. Pratt may not last the week." Ariana exhaled, her hands folded in her lap. "Then we keep pushing not out of vengeance, but to make space for real reform." The reckoning came on a Friday morning.
The board of directors announced an emergency press conference. Cameras crowded the lobby of Atlas headquarters as the chairwoman stepped to the podium. Her statement was brief but seismic. Effective immediately, Lawrence Pratt and the executive leadership team are relieved of their positions. Atlas Airlines will undergo a comprehensive overhaul, beginning with new leadership committed to equity, accountability, and transparency. The room erupted in shouts, reporters clamoring for details. But the headline was already written: Atlas fires CEO and entire leadership team. Ariana watched the broadcast from her office in New York. Caleb sat beside her, eyes wide. "Mom, they actually fired them." She nodded slowly, the reality sinking in. For a moment, she felt the urge to weep, not out of triumph, but out of sheer relief. The battle had been brutal, public, and exhausting, but change was no longer a distant hope. It was here, written in the fall of a man who once thought himself untouchable. That evening, Ariana stood again before cameras. This time, not as a victim, but as a leader. "This is not my victory alone," she said. "This belongs to every passenger who has been told to move, every employee silenced by fear, every child who deserves to grow up in a world where dignity is honored, not bargained. Today, Atlas has fallen. Tomorrow, we rise higher." The crowd roared, and Ariana felt the weight of countless eyes not as a burden, but as a mantle. She had become the face of a movement, and with it came responsibility. At home, later that night, she sat on the balcony with Caleb. The city stretched out before them, alive with possibility. Caleb leaned against her shoulder. "You didn't just win, Mom. You changed everything." Ariana wrapped her arm around him, her gaze steady on the horizon. "No, Caleb, we changed it together." The reckoning had come, but Ariana knew the fight was not over. It was only beginning. The announcement of Pratt's removal sent shockwaves through the industry, but Ariana knew the real work had only just begun. Removing a corrupt head didn't heal the body. It only cleared the infection. The wounds left behind, mistrust, exhaustion, systemic bias, would need deliberate care to mend. 2 days after the firings, Ariana was invited to meet with interim Atlas leadership at their Dallas headquarters. Danielle accompanied her, both women stepping past a lobby still flanked by protesters. The chants had softened not into silence, but into hope. Signs now read, "Reform, now and dignity in every flight." The new interim chairwoman, Evelyn Carr, greeted Ariana with cautious warmth. A veteran of the industry, Evelyn had weathered decades of turbulence. Her silver hair framed a face lined not just with age, but with resilience. "Mrs. Fields," Evelyn said, extending her hand. "I know the company has wronged you deeply. We cannot erase that, but we hope to learn from it." Ariana studied her carefully, then shook her hand. "Learning is only the beginning. Atlas doesn't need a new face. It needs a new soul." Inside the boardroom, Ariana outlined a vision, not vengeance, not token gestures, but systemic change. Mandatory anti-bias training designed with outside experts, anonymous reporting channels with guaranteed follow-up, a passenger advocate office, independent of management, transparent audits of service patterns to expose disparities. Danielle added details, clicking through a presentation. "We propose the creation of an equity council, half internal employees, half external voices. They report directly to the board, not management. No more burying complaints." The room was quiet. Some executives nodded slowly, others shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn finally spoke. "This is ambitious. It's disruptive. But perhaps disruption is exactly what we need." Ariana didn't flinch. Disruption is survival. The world is watching. Either Atlas leads the industry into a new era or it collapses under the weight of the old one. The proposals made headlines the next day. Ariana Fields pushes for Airline Equity Council. One paper declared, public sentiment surged further in her favor, but Ariana resisted the temptation to bask in praise. She focused on the grind meetings, policy drafts, conversations with unions and community leaders. In between, she carved out moments with Caleb. One evening, they walked along the Trinity River, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in orange streaks. Caleb skipped stones across the water. "Do you think people will really change?" "Mom," he asked softly. Ariana watched the ripples expand. "Change is slow." "Caleb, people resist it, but when the truth is undeniable, even the strongest walls start to crack." He nodded, then smiled faintly. "Then, let's make sure those cracks don't close back up." While reforms brewed at Atlas, ripple effects spread. Other airlines announced their own reviews. Lawmakers introduced preliminary drafts of the Equity in Air Travel Act. Civil rights groups launched campaigns urging passengers to report bias more boldly. Ariana became not just a face of protest, but a voice of rebuilding. One night, at a national conference on transportation, she stood before an audience of industry leaders. Her tone was calm, but her words cut with precision. Airlines like to speak of safety as their highest duty. But safety is not just mechanical. Safety is dignity. A passenger who feels unsafe in their humanity is as endangered as one flying on a faulty engine. If you want loyalty, if you want trust, start by treating dignity as non-negotiable. The room fell into reflective silence. Even CEOs accustomed to brushing off criticism leaned forward, listening. Ariana saw the shift small, but real. Meanwhile, Danielle navigated the political battlefield. She met with senators, union reps, and consumer advocates. If Ariana is the compass, she told one lawmaker, "My job is to make sure the ship actually sails." But change never came without resistance. Conservative pundits accused Ariana of politicizing travel. Some shareholders grumbled about costs. A former Atlas VP went on television, sneering that Ariana was milking a moment. Ariana watched the clip late one night, Caleb asleep on the couch beside her. She muted the television and stroked her son's hair. She thought about every insult hurled her way since the incident. They stung, but they also clarified her mission. She whispered into the quiet room, "If this is what it takes, then let them sneer." Weeks later, Ariana returned to an Atlas terminal, not as a passenger, but as a guest speaker for employee training. The room was filled with flight attendants, gate agents, pilots, mechanics. She looked at them, saw the fatigue, the pride, the wariness. "I don't come here as your enemy," she told them. "I come here as someone who believes you deserve better, too. You shouldn't have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. You shouldn't fear punishment for treating someone with fairness. The changes we're building aren't just for passengers, they're for you." A hand rose in the back. It was Samantha Cole, the gate agent who had first asked her to give up her seat. Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Fields, I made a mistake that day. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I was afraid for my job. I'm sorry." The room went still. Ariana studied Samantha, then spoke with quiet gravity. Acknowledging silence is the first step to breaking it. We've all been afraid at some point, but courage is contagious. Next time, speak and you'll find you're not alone. Samantha's eyes glistened. Others in the room nodded slowly, the words sinking in. That night, Ariana received an email from an Atlas flight attendant. "You gave me permission to speak up. For the first time, I don't feel like silence is my only option." Ariana closed her laptop and pressed her hands to her eyes, tears burning. The movement was no longer just external. It was reshaping hearts inside the system. As the first quarter under new leadership closed, Atlas reported improved passenger satisfaction despite reduced profits. Analysts debated the company's future, but Ariana dismissed the noise. Real change was never measured in quarterly earnings. It was measured in trust rebuilt, in voices freed. On a quiet Sunday, Ariana and Caleb planted a tree in the small garden behind their building. Caleb patted soil around the base, grinning. "What kind is it again?" "A red oak," Ariana said, pressing her hand to the young trunk. "Strong roots, wide branches. It'll outlast us if we take care of it." Caleb tilted his head. "Like what you're building with Atlas," Ariana smiled. "Exactly like that." As she stood there, hands dirty, sun warming her shoulders, Ariana felt something she hadn't in months. Peace. The skies were still clouded, but for the first time, she believed they could clear. By the time summer settled over Dallas, Ariana had grown used to waking up to a stream of emails, news alerts, and policy drafts. Yet this morning felt different. She sipped her coffee by the window, sunlight spilling across the table, and realized that the storm which once consumed her days had shifted into something quieter, steadier. Change was no longer a fight waged in airports. It was a movement taking root across industries. Atlas Airways had become the unexpected blueprint. The reforms Ariana pushed for the Equity Council, independent reporting channels. Bias audits were now being studied by other airlines, bus lines, even hotel chains. The phrase dignity dividend had entered the business lexicon, used by analysts to argue that treating people fairly wasn't just moral, but profitable. Yet Ariana resisted the temptation to frame it as victory. She remembered too well the humiliation of being asked to surrender her seat, the sting of eyes judging her, the shame pressed upon her by those in power. That wound was still there, and she knew countless others carried similar scars. One afternoon, she traveled to Washington, D.C., for hearings on the proposed Equity in Air Travel Act. The chamber buzzed with lobbyists and lawmakers. Ariana sat at the long table, microphone before her, Caleb watching from the gallery. Danielle sat nearby, flipping through thick folders of testimony. When it was her turn to speak, Ariana leaned in. "What happened to me on that flight was not an isolated mistake. It was part of a pattern. For too long, travelers of color, disabled passengers, parents with young children, they've been treated as inconveniences instead of human beings. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for the dignity every ticket promises." She paused, scanning the room. Some senators leaned forward, pens poised. Others crossed their arms, skeptical. Ariana continued, steady. "This act is not about punishing airlines. It's about holding them accountable to their own mission statements. If the skies are to belong to everyone, then dignity cannot be optional." The hearing made national headlines. Civil rights leaders praised her clarity. Critics grumbled about costs and overreach. Ariana didn't mind the debate. What mattered was that the issue could no longer be ignored. Back in Dallas, Ariana faced a more personal challenge. Caleb had started avoiding the news, his bright spirit dimmed by the constant talk of racism and injustice. One evening, Ariana found him hunched over his sketchbook, doodling airplanes with sad faces drawn on the windows. "Baby, what's on your mind?" she asked gently. He looked up, hesitant. "It just feels like, no matter what you do, Mom, people still hate us. What if it never changes?" Ariana sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. She studied his drawings, planes weighed down by sorrow. "I can't promise hate will disappear," she admitted. "But I can promise you this love and truth are louder than hate when we keep speaking them. And every time someone chooses dignity, the world shifts a little. Caleb rested his head against her. "Do you think I could help make it shift too?" Ariana smiled softly. "You already are."
In the weeks that followed, Ariana invited Caleb into the work. He attended community forums with her, where survivors of discrimination shared their stories. He asked questions, sometimes too direct for the adults in the room, but always cutting to the heart. People left those forums not just remembering Ariana's calm authority, but the earnestness of a boy who refused to accept cruelty as normal. Meanwhile, Danielle pressed forward on the political front. She coordinated with unions to ensure protections for whistleblowers. She drafted memos to state legislators, urging them to adopt similar equity standards. One night, over takeout containers scattered across Ariana's dining table, she confessed her exhaustion. "Sometimes I wonder if we're just patching holes in a sinking ship," Danielle said, rubbing her temples. Ariana placed her hand over hers. "Then, let's build a new ship. One that floats because it was designed with everyone in mind." That line later appeared in Danielle's op-ed for the New York Times. "We are not patching holes. We are redesigning the vessel." The piece went viral, sparking debates in boardrooms and classrooms alike. Still, backlash brewed. A group of former Atlas executives launched a campaign calling the reforms overregulation by activists. One television host sneered, "Do we really need a council of feelings to run our airlines?" Ariana responded, not with outrage, but with evidence. She released early data showing fewer passenger complaints, reduced staff turnover, and improved customer satisfaction. Numbers silenced what insults could not. But Ariana also understood numbers alone could not heal. Healing came in moments like the day she received a letter from a young flight attendant. "Because of the new reporting system, I finally spoke up about harassment from a supervisor. For the first time, I wasn't punished for telling the truth. Thank you for making space for my voice." Ariana folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a box she kept on her nightstand, filled with similar notes. Whenever doubt crept in, she opened that box, reminders that behind the policies were real lives changed. Months passed, and Ariana was invited to speak at universities across the country. At one event in Chicago, a young woman raised her hand during the Q&A. "How did you stay so calm when they humiliated you on that flight?" Ariana thought for a long moment. "Because anger burns hot, but short. Calm is harder, it's heavier, but calm carries you through the storm long enough to turn it into something else. I wasn't calm because I wasn't angry. I was calm because I refused to let anger control the ending of my story." The audience sat in rapt silence, many scribbling notes. Ariana knew then that her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, anyone who had ever been asked to give up their seat. One evening, Ariana and Caleb visited the red oak tree they had planted months earlier. Its leaves rustled in the warm wind, branches stretching taller than before. Caleb leaned against the trunk, smiling. "It's growing, Mom, just like your movement." Ariana touched the bark. "Our movement, Caleb, yours, mine, Danielle's, and everyone who believes we deserve better." As twilight deepened, she felt a quiet certainty settle over her. The incident that once seemed like a private humiliation had become something larger, a catalyst, a seed planted in broken soil that now grew into something enduring. The legacy of change was not in her name, nor in Atlas Airways alone. It lived in every traveler who boarded a plane with confidence instead of fear. It lived in every worker who spoke up without trembling. It lived in every child who drew airplanes with smiling windows instead of frowns. And for Ariana Fields, that was enough.
The first chill of autumn swept across New York City as Ariana Fields walked through the bustling concourse of LaGuardia Airport. Travelers hurried past, some balancing coffee cups, others dragging oversized suitcases. She paused for a moment, watching the tide of humanity, each face carrying a story. Airports had once been battlegrounds for her dignity. Now, they had become symbols of possibility. A billboard hung above the security checkpoint. Bold letters read, "Coal Air where everyone belongs." Ariana smiled faintly. It wasn't her airline, but she knew her fight had helped shape that slogan. Competitors were rushing to show they cared about equity. Some were sincere, others opportunistic. But either way, the standard had changed. Her phone buzzed. A message from Danielle Rivers lit the screen. Bill passed the Senate, heading to the president's desk. Ariana exhaled slowly. The Equity in Air Travel Act, once just a fragile draft Danielle scribbled on a notepad, was about to become law. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would force airlines to maintain transparent data on discrimination, establish ombudsman offices, and guarantee passengers legal recourse. Nearby. Caleb tugged at her sleeve. He was taller now, his voice deeper, his presence less boyish. "Mom, is it weird that airports don't make me nervous anymore?" Ariana laughed softly. "It's not weird at all. That's exactly how it should be." They joined the line for security. The agent at the checkpoint, a young Latina woman with a bright smile, scanned Ariana's ticket and ID. She looked up, recognition flashing across her face. "Ms. Fields, thank you for what you did. My mom was a flight attendant for 20 years. She used to come home crying about things she saw. Because of the new rules, she says she finally feels safe at work." Ariana's eyes softened. "Tell her I said thank you for every day she showed up when it wasn't easy." As they walked toward their gate, Caleb nudged her. "See, Mom, you didn't just change the law, you changed lives." The announcement for boarding crackled overhead. Ariana and Caleb found their seats in first class. This time, no one questioned them, no one asked them to move. Instead, a flight attendant offered a respectful smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Fields. We're honored to have you with us today." Ariana settled into her seat, gazing out at the runway. Planes lifted gracefully into the sky, their engines roaring with promise. She remembered the day she was told to give up her seat, the humiliation, the anger she swallowed down. That pain had been real, but so was this moment. She hadn't just reclaimed her seat, she had made sure countless others would never have to fight for theirs. Mid-flight. Caleb dozed off beside her, his head resting on her shoulder. Ariana opened her laptop and began drafting a letter, not to lawmakers or executives, but to future travelers she would never meet. If you are reading this, know that the sky belongs to you. Don't shrink yourself for anyone. Don't believe the lie that dignity must be earned. It is already yours, and if someone ever tries to take it away, remember you have more power than you think. She closed the laptop, feeling the words settle like a quiet blessing. Weeks later, Ariana stood under the sprawling branches of the red oak tree in Dallas. Its roots had dug deeper, its leaves turning amber with the season. Danielle was there, too, along with Evelyn Carr, union leaders, community advocates, and neighbors who had supported Ariana through the firestorm. Caleb handed out small slips of paper with handwritten messages from children across the country, letters of thanks, drawings of airplanes, notes that read, "I'm not afraid to fly anymore." Together, they buried a small-time capsule beneath the tree. Inside were those letters, clippings of newspaper headlines, and Ariana's original boarding pass from that fateful flight. "This isn't just my story," Ariana said to the gathered crowd. "It's ours, and it belongs to every person who ever refused to surrender their dignity." The wind rustled the branches, scattering leaves across the grass like fragments of gold. Ariana looked out at the faces before her: young, old, black, white, Latino, Asian, men in suits, women in uniforms, children clutching balloons. In their eyes, she saw not pity or sorrow, but solidarity. Later that evening, back at home, Ariana sat quietly with Caleb. They flipped through a scrapbook he had made photos of protests, clippings of articles, candid shots of Ariana speaking at rallies, even doodles of smiling airplanes. "Do you think people will remember all this?" Caleb asked. Ariana thought for a moment, then answered softly, "I don't need them to remember me. I need them to remember what we stood for." That dignity isn't a privilege. It's a right. Caleb closed the scrapbook and hugged her tightly. "Then they will, Mom. They have to." Months turned into years. The red oak grew taller, its branches reaching wide across the Dallas sky. Travelers boarded planes with more confidence. Workers reported abuse without fear, and children sketched airplanes without frowns. And though Ariana knew the fight for justice would never truly end, she carried one certainty in her heart: she had kept her seat, and in doing so, she had made room for everyone else. The story of Ariana Fields reminds us that dignity is not a privilege, it is a birthright. Her calm but firm refusal to surrender her seat speaks to a truth many of us know. Injustice often comes disguised as small requests. How many times in life are we told to shrink, to yield, to stay quiet, simply because challenging the moment feels too heavy? Yet Ariana shows us that our strength lies not in anger alone, but in choosing how to respond.
For older generations, this story resonates deeply. Many have witnessed or lived through times when speaking up carried great risk. Yet here, we see that courage can be quiet. It can look like holding your ground, documenting the truth, and insisting that systems be better not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. The lesson is simple but profound. We cannot control how others see us, but we can choose how we carry ourselves. By doing so, we plant seeds of change. Ariana's journey is proof that one person's dignity, defended at the right moment, can ripple outward to reshape an entire system. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like this matter because they remind us of the power of dignity, justice, and courage. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire and heal. Together, let's keep these conversations alive.